morning, everybody. Hello, and welcome to the One World Media Global Reporting Summit. I'm Gemma Bradshaw. I'm the director of One World Media, and this is day 3 of our event. So we've started this event as a small thing in COVID to try and bring our global community together, and it's grown into a 3-day, 2-city online event. On Tuesday, we were in Nairobi, which was a really incredible day of conversation there and streamed globally. And today, the same. We're in London for a day of events, but again, welcome a global audience who are seeing us all online. So if you don't know One World Media, it's always, I have the mic so I can tell you a bit about the other things we do, whether you like it or not. So we are a charity based here in London, working globally to support filmmakers and journalists that tell underreported stories. We do that in a number of ways. The flagship event is our One World Media Awards. It's been running now for over 35 years. And we support all formats. We have one of our winners here today, Runako, and she will be leading the first session. And so we work with our award winners throughout the year to celebrate their work. But we also have a big talent program supporting filmmakers and journalists at those tough moments in your career to get to the next level. And we do that through a fellowship, through pitching sessions, and through training. So the Global Short Docs Forum is a big event, and many of the filmmakers that went through that program have been involved in the program this year at the summit. So if you're interested, we have a fellowship right now with the FT. It's the FT African Fellowship, and it's your chance to get your story on the front page of the FT. So if you're interested, please grab a member of staff if you're here in the room, or on our website, get in touch with us and find out more about that. So today, the summit. We've spent 3 days talking about the role of impact in journalism and filmmaking. For some people, that's an odd question. For others, and everyone on the stage with us today, that's not odd at all. Journalism, filmmaking, it's about thinking where your story goes and where it can have the biggest effect on the world. So we'll be talking about everything from visual storytelling and the role of documentaries in solutions journalism to what the commissioners think about it all. So we're kicking off with a panel thinking about what the role of journalism and whether you need to be an activist to really make a difference. And to host that session, we have Runako, Celina, who is a BBC Africa Eye journalist and One World Media New Voice Award winner. And I'll leave it to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. So today's panel is on impact beyond distribution. We have an esteemed panel. I'll give a top-line introduction to you guys, and then I'll kind of hand the mic over for you guys to introduce yourselves. But we'll be speaking about impact and what that means for us as journalists, as filmmakers, as storytellers, what our roles are. Are we activists? Is that a controversial question even? And yeah, so I'll start over here. This is Owen Pinnell, who is a producer. He focuses on films from the Middle East and North Africa, including a film that we hope to speak about more today, Under Poison Skies, which if you haven't watched yet, we'll get some more information on, and it's just phenomenal. And we have Miriam Wells, who is impact editor at the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, interested in social justice stories and public interest journalism. And we also have Isla Gordon-Crozier, hope I got that right, who is the development producer at Waterbear. And we'll hear more about Waterbear as well today. So Miriam, I wanted to kind of start with you, to be honest, about impact producing, what it is, what it looks like. How would you define it?
Oh, that's probably a long answer, so I'll try and keep it short. So yeah, at the Bureau, just for those of you that don't know the Bureau, we are a non-profit newsroom in the UK. We're the biggest independent non-profit newsroom in the UK, and we have 4 global teams and a UK team, all looking at kind of systemic issues of injustice and wrongdoing. And we are mission driven. We are really aiming for our work to both uncover, uncover hard-hitting stories and powerful human stories, but also to spark change. And we have me, impact editor, role we created 4 years ago, sitting inside the senior editorial team. And each of our investigative teams in the different themes has an impact producer or a community organizer embedded inside the team as well. And a short version of what that means is that, I mean, the way I'd summarize it top level is that I guess the reporters are really thinking about what the story is, and the impact producers are thinking about what the story will do or can do in the world. So we have questions about impact embedded from our editorial process, right from before we've even conceived of a story, through the process as to how we're developing and shaping it, and then how we are distributing it, and then how we are continuing our work after the distribution. So the two main kind of things that the impact producer is doing, well, the three main things is thinking strategically throughout that process and being focused on impact throughout that process. Secondly, kind of building relationships with all of the kind of groups and individuals and institutions that are also working on the same issue, or we really try to embed ourselves in the community around the issues that we're working on. And then the third part is really thinking strategically about, when we've got our investigation, who are the people that need to see this, who could benefit from it, who should be paying attention, and how can we get it to those audiences in the right time, in the right way, in the right format. That's really important. So we co-publish everything we do with big major media outlets and specialist outlets and local outlets and hyperlocal outlets, but we also then think who are the audiences that need this or could use this information, who aren't necessarily going to read it in the story format or in the published format, and we think about how can we reach them where they are in a really meaningful way that they can engage with this work. So that's a kind of fairly quick summary, not that quick.
Also, just a bit about you. I kind of gave the top line, but I forgot to also kind of ask you to introduce, like, how you even got into that in the first place.
Yes, well, I've been a journalist since my whole career. I started as a local paper reporter in Brighton when I was 23, and so I've worked across all media, from local papers, national papers, BBC Radio, BBC Current Affairs, Vice News, so like digital media, but I'd kind of gradually become disillusioned through this kind of 12, 13 years of doing this. By the time I was a foreign correspondent in Latin America, and I could write about the most awful human rights abuses in the Sunday Times, biggest selling newspaper, and nothing would happen. And I just began to feel, well, firstly, a little bit, I didn't really like the kind of foreign correspondent model, and second of all, I felt like it wasn't the reason I'd become a journalist to make a difference wasn't really happening. And so I ended up thinking, right, what do I really want to do? I want to do non-profit. I want to do investigative journalism, and I managed to get a job at the Bureau back when it was just 9 people, about 7 years ago, and I was originally production editor. We created this role of impact editor 4 years ago, but I feel like I've been talking a lot now, so I can
To be honest, I find this really interesting. I'd love to know more about that, especially when it comes to impact. Because you've kind of seen the process the whole way through, a decade plus in the industry, what do people get wrong about impact?
Well, when you talk to, there's a lot of anxiety among journalists in sort of traditional media. If you mention sort of actively thinking about impact, it's this real kind of, oh my God, no, we're journalists, we're not activists. It's not our job to make anything change. It's, we are just simply here to find the truth and gather the truth, and then give the truth to the world. And then what happens to it is none of our business. So, and even at the Bureau, where we are mission driven, everybody's there because they want to do something good. There was anxiety at the beginning when we started this that we were going to be compromising our journalistic integrity. But I really, I've evolved quite a lot in my thinking. I've never, and it's not about, thinking about impact isn't about, we are going to change this, we're going to make, I think it can be in other areas, but for the Bureau, the way our model looks is we're simply saying we want journalism to do its job properly, and we all agree that journalism strengthens democracy, it holds power to account, it has this really important role to play. Like when you say that, that's not controversial. So if you just break down how it does that, how does it hold power to account? How does it strengthen democracy? And if you spend a bit of time thinking about that, because it will always be some version of how people are interacting with the work and using it and taking it forward. So if you spend a bit of time thinking about how can we do something that's going to be genuinely useful, and how are we going to get it to the people who can use it in the most useful way, in the most useful time? If you just think a little bit about that, the power of your work is really greatly amplified. I don't think there'd be any other product in the world where you think, right, I'm creating this product, but I'm not going to think about the people that are going to use it. It's not up to me what they do with it or whether it's useful. I'm just going to give it to them how I think it should be given. But with, so why don't we do more with that with journalism, thinking about what we're really doing this for, who's it for, and let's make it really work for them. So yeah, I just sort of describe it now as, I just want to make your journalism really do its job.
Have you had any pushback though in you guys' approach?
It was, I mean, at the beginning, yeah, it was like everybody thought it was really being led by funders. I mean, which initially the conversations were, that was, 5-6 years ago, it was a kind of funder-led conversation, but we really wanted to actually think ourselves about what we were doing our work for and how to deliver on our mission. So yeah, it was a lot of reassurance. There was a big culture change process that I had to go through, and it's taken, I've been doing it 4 years, and now we really do have a proper culture of impact and people get it and understand. But yeah, a lot of reassuring that you're not suddenly going to become activists, and that you're not going to take time away from the reporting, and you're not going to sort of threaten the story. You're actually going to make the story go a lot further and do a lot more. So yeah, there was pushback even at the Bureau, which is overtly mission driven. Yeah.
Just finally on this is just any examples from your time at the Bureau of when it's worked really well, when you've achieved maximum impact?
I mean, I'd say we are, this, from experience, you can say doing this work has absolutely dramatically transformed the impact that we have from individual ground, grassroots, community level to top level institutional. So, I mean, there's an example every week about like
the one that stands out most? Or
I've just been giving a present. There's so many different types, because there's the stuff where your impact really makes an individual level, like has a profound effect on somebody's life. There's stuff. But the example I've just given of in a previous presentation, an investigation we did on Deliveroo was a few years ago. Deliveroo is, for the international audience, it's a food delivery app that restaurants give their takeaway food to a rider, and the rider delivers it to people's homes. They don't have any workers' rights because they are self-employed, even though they're sort of treated like employees. We collaborated with riders who'd come to us with an idea to create a sort of first-of-a-kind data set about how much they were being paid, because there was really no data about pay in the gig economy. Riders didn't have any idea how they would be paid, how much, or how it was calculated, all done by a very opaque algorithm. We collaborated with riders on that to create this data set. We had goals. Our impact goals were really around creating this data set that could feed into political debate and, potential legislation. It was equipping riders with information about their situation and about their rights or lack of rights. It was really just wanting to spark that conversation about gig economy pay. Deliveroo was set to float on the London Stock Exchange later that year, and it was billed to be the biggest float opening day for a company ever on the London Stock Exchange. So we planned that story with those goals in mind. So really think in terms of the timing, we published a few weeks before the flotation of the IPO. We built, as well as the big stories that we published with the ITV and the Daily Mirror. So we were trying to reach that mass audience and sort of create that conversation. But we also did a financial press release really tailored for an investor audience and sent that very widely all over the world to all sorts of financial publications. Did the same with the catering and food press. We really wanted to also, this is an issue for the restaurants who also have to pay a very high commission to Deliveroo. We also contacted Marcus Rashford. He's a very famous footballer who has campaigned on child food poverty, and Deliveroo was one of the corporate sponsors of his initiative, so we wanted him to know about it. And so by sort of tailoring the way the information went out there, it really was incredibly successful, more than we could have hoped, actually. The conversation, the news went all over the world. There was more pickup by more than 250 outlets, from New York Times and Financial Times down to sort of really specific, all the sort of the Grocer, which is a food retail industry magazine in the UK, and even a football website, doing a story on it. six of the biggest investment funds in the world said that they would not be participating in the IPO, they would not be buying Deliveroo shares because of concerns about workers' rights. There really was a big conversation around workers' rights. Again, this isn't just because of our story, this is because the IPO is happening, right? So everybody's thinking about Deliveroo, but that's part of our decision about how to time the story. $2 billion was wiped off the share price. I mean, we don't sort of publish that because legally any hint that you were trying to negatively impact the finances of the company is very, very problematic legally. But we weren't aiming to do that. We were simply aiming to. We wanted to inform the relevant people at the relevant time. Yeah, it ended up being the worst opening day of a company floating on the London Stock Exchange ever, instead of the best. And we had a lot of high-level political response. We had Marcus Rashford saying he would talk to Deliveroo, but then that human level, like really, one of the riders who'd worked with us during the process and investigated decided he wanted to become a journalist, which is actually my favourite piece of impact of the whole thing, because you had a really kind of profound effect on someone's life there and really built trust in journalism and made that, really equip them with that feeling of agency that they can, they have power within their own lives to try and investigate or make a difference. So yeah, that's one example.
That's a phenomenal example, especially because it's impact on so many different levels. Isla, I kind of wanted to bring you in here, especially with Waterbear and what you do. You guys seem to house high impact films from lots of different charities, NGOs, organizations. Can you give us a top line about what Waterbear does?
Yeah, so anyone that doesn't know, we're an interactive media platform and publisher, free subscription. So we believe in access to everyone. And like you said, most films on on the platform will have impact campaign, some more than others, but each of them would have a link to a petition or a donation or a clear call to action. And whether it's linked to an NGO through a commissioning model that most of us are either used to, or more journalistic through a filmmaker that we would be commissioning as part of a Waterbear original and telling a story, whether it's short or long form. We started mainly in documentaries, but are sort of shifting the genre into docufiction and scripted format as well.
So with these kind of, when it comes to commissions, when it comes to acquisitions as well, what are you thinking about when it comes to impact? What stage of the process does that even come into question?
We definitely look at all, everything encompassed as 360 within the production, whether it is characters, director, writer, on and off camera, the impact that would drive. Matar is a good example, actually, about Delivery Driver. Writer and director were Syrian, and they wrote this story docufiction about their experiences seeking asylum in the UK. And not only did they write the story with the intention for it to be distributed online for mass appeal and audiences, being a free subscription, but also we had various, strategy around impact, both on and off camera, as well as we released it the week that the illegal migration bill came out in April in the UK. And aim was to sign as many petitions as possible, and through our network that happened. And we also worked with Choose Love, which was an NGO, which facilitated that impact side of it. We have an impact director on the marketing team, as well as an impact producer like Miriam, and in that sense, like editorially, it's focused both on and off screen. So it lives on for as long as possible, and that's the intention.
I think one of the kind of common themes here has been timing. Why is timing so important when it comes to impact?
That's a good question.
Sorry.
No, I think speaking about Matar specifically, it was well timed in the sense that the legal migration bill was coming out, and it was so shocking from a UK perspective. And we were able to facilitate creative storytelling, not only to explore an individual's perspective of the situation, but also explain to others that perhaps would come to Waterbear for environmental issues, which is mainly what a lot of our films are, but we also believe in humanitarian issues, and it all is important and comes together. And I think it's, you know, timely to drive action, whether it's small or big.
I also wonder just what stage of the process are you thinking about impact? Does it come in from the very beginning when an idea is presented to you, or is it kind of at the end near the rollout?
Yeah, we usually option or commission projects with a clear impact from the beginning. We do, you know, as a development producer, I do work with filmmakers who haven't come from impact backgrounds or journalistic backgrounds. They're not activists necessarily. But I do believe that everyone is an activist if you're trying to shift mindsets. And so it's just a matter of sort of developing that impact. And one story could have many different perspectives. I think it's really important, or at least we say at Waterbear in terms of developing a story, to focus on one. So there's a clear call to action, whether it is through a petition or signing a bill or making a donation. It would be amazing to do everything, but you know, you have to one step at a time.
What's the example, similar question, like what's the example that you're most proudest of? Have you seen something that's worked particularly well?
I think Matar was the best example this year. Just the amount of petitions that was signed through the platform. We also have a film called Slay, which has done really well on the platform. It's about animal product used in luxury fashion. And Rebecca, we acquired the film. It wasn't a commission, but it proves that even acquisitions for the platform can reach wider audiences, both online as well as we created an impact campaign with her as part of the acquisition, and we filmed it at, you know, fashion student forums during Fashion Week. In order to create a wider impact and really explain the issues that the fashion world had, and that's impressive. I think that a lot of people talk about it if you in those echo chambers of journalism or the fashion industry and those issues, but if you're interested in fashion and you're a daily consumer, then and you don't understand where you're buying things from, then you're already impacted and taking action.
From experience, is there anything that just doesn't work that you'd advise people to stay far away from in terms of technique or implementation?
No, but let me think about that, and maybe I'll come back to me maybe I'll think.
Yeah, we can definitely come back to it. Thank you for that. Owen, I wondered if you could just tell us about Under Poisoned Skies. I mean, we were speaking about examples, and leading to you is the perfect kind of way to kind of go next, because Under Poisoned Skies has been amazing, the impact that you've achieved already. Can you tell us what the film was about for anyone who hasn't seen it just yet?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So Under Poisoned Skies is, it's about the oil industry in southern Iraq, basically looking at how they're using the companies who are operating the oil fields in southern Iraq are using extremely toxic practices, which is having an extremely serious and bad impact on the health of the communities living around those oil fields. So the film follows a scientist from Basra University who's basically taking samples and trying to establish how bad this pollution is. And it also follows the stories of children who are living nearby these oil fields who are suffering with forms of cancer which can be linked to the types of pollutants which are being emitted by the oil companies' processes. So it's looking at, and those companies are some of the biggest household names, BP. We also looked at Shell and Eni or ENI, which is the Italian company. So those kind of big global companies and their responsibility when it comes to polluting and causing serious health impacts to people living in the proximity of their operations.
I wondered if you could also tell us not how you achieved this impact, but what impact you've had so far.
Sure. Yeah. So it's been kind of a range of different impacts that I think that we've had. I think the sort of at that sort of policy structural kind of level, we had quite a positive response from the Iraqi government. In that we sort of, I think as we were making the film, realized that there was a kind of divide within the Iraqi government between the environmental ministries and then the oil ministry. And certainly I think the film gave the environment ministry people who really wanted to change things a kind of a moment to sort of point, something to point to and say, we need to change things. And they brought forward their commitment to end flaring by 4 years. Of course, there's these commitments don't always pan out, but I mean, at least rhetorically, they seem to be moved by the film and want to change things. And then the film's also become part of the kind of international conversation when there are these high-level meetings. So the Iraqi prime minister has had bilateral meetings with French president and the German chancellor, and in those meetings, flaring is being raised increasingly. Flaring is the practice that oil companies are doing at these oil fields, which is incredibly toxic, just burning an enormous amount of gas in a very polluting way. And that's basically, I think we've seen it it's moved up the agenda, and we like to think our film has had, has contributed to that now being something which is raised at those highest political levels, putting that issue on the table. So yeah, I think that's definitely, that's that kind of like very high level sort of policy kind of impact, which is, I guess, kind of slower and maybe harder in a way. Like you just hope that immediately they stop, what they're doing, or new laws are enacted, but that it doesn't obviously tend to work like that. It seems like the conversation starts to move in that direction at those policy levels, and then hopefully it does lead to change. And then I guess there's been other impacts at more personal community kind of levels as well. I mean, one thing that was really amazing for us is that we had the opportunity, I guess, talking about timing again, our film came out right before COP in Egypt, and we were able to bring Ali, who's one of the young people who is extremely badly affected by pollution, in that his town, Rumaila, was in the middle of Iraq's biggest oil field run by BP, and he was suffering with cancer, with leukemia, and was an extremely powerful advocate for his community, telling his story in the film through video diaries. And we were able to bring him to COP27 with the help of clean air and advocacy groups who'd seen the film. And so that kind of impact was really important in sort of putting, sort of linking up this community with activists from around the world who were already working on these subjects, these topics of holding oil companies to account. And I think it was a really big moment for Ali and his father who came, and it was also it was a I think important thing for shining a light on that issue, which maybe wasn't being talked about at COP at that point. It was it feels a long way from a community like that, but it kind of brought the issue that community was facing to this global event, which felt really important. And I'm trying to think of there's other kind of, I guess, impacts which are maybe less direct, but I guess one thing that was also really it was a really sort of tragic circumstance that brought this about. But sort of 6 months after the film came out, Ali's cancer came back, because during the film his cancer was in remission, and it meant that there was a big campaign started to raise money for his treatment, which sadly it wasn't enough to save his life, but I think it massively raised awareness of how badly hit these communities are, and it also led to this sort of moment of accountability at BP's AGM, which was Ali's father speaking at the shareholder meeting and holding Bernard Looney, BP's then CEO, to account, and asking him the question of, how do you justify, how polluted our neighborhood is? How do you justify putting my son's health at risk? And that was a huge moment of accountability, which again drew global attention, and it was a kind of a moment of impact, I guess, that then was shared by Greta Thunberg, and even Arnold Schwarzenegger was involved somehow, but he was tweeting about it. So it was, that was a huge moment in a really tragic circumstance. So I think that's a few different examples of the impact.
I just wanted to comment. That's such an incredibly powerful story. I think it really exemplifies something that I think about a lot when I think about journalism's unique role in change, which is what you need to think about if you're thinking about impact. Like, what are we bringing that's different to what all the other kind of groups and organizations and actors that are also working on change are doing? And one particularly unique role that journalism plays is telling stories and raising voices that make people feel and care. Like, in some senses, as investigative journalists at the Bureau, we're doing this similar thing to what research organizations might do, or think tanks and so on, scientists, academics, we're gathering data, gathering evidence, uncovering stuff. But what we can do that others can't is we can really make people feel and care about that data and about those stories by telling the human stories. And again, some of the most impact I feel most proud of is similar situations where the journalism can also facilitate this interaction between different voices that would never otherwise happen, like being able to bring Ali's voice to COP, to people that hold power at the top of global institutions. That's something that journalism can do that other people can't. We did a similar thing with a exploited migrant worker in the House of Lords recently. But yeah, and it's a really good example of how journalism can do something really unique. Because if all the research in the world isn't going to necessarily spur somebody's attitude to change or behavior to change, or you've got to really make people feel, and that's something that we can do.
I mean, with that then, at what stage are you thinking about that being possible? I mean, that's amazing impact, but where do you factor that in? When you're thinking about storytelling, you were on the ground yourself, weren't you, filming? And so you're interacting with communities, you're seeing these people who need to kind of get their story out. And so at what stage are you thinking, we're going to release this just before COP? We're going to, where does that come in?
Yeah, I think early on we wanted the story obviously to have impact beyond just revealing the situation as being bad, and one aspect of that was just to think about how we can bring something new to this story. In that, I think at the point that we came out, there had been stories before about the pollution that these oil companies were causing in these communities, but we were thinking, okay, what can we bring that was new? And one thing was the kind of scientific tests that showed how severe the pollution actually was. And so we, one of the reasons for doing that was the belief that could then spur change and impact in a way that just pointing to the situation, and how bad it was, maybe like bringing that evidence could actually change things. And I think also focusing on these global companies who are, there are some roots to accountability there, in that they are, public companies who supposedly care about their image. That meant we kind of chose to focus on them over, maybe smaller local companies, because there is the possibility of having some impact and having some change. And I think the other thing was just to put people who are change makers at the heart of the story as well. So we really focused on Ali because we identified him as someone who was really already, speaking out about his community on a sort of local level. He sort of clearly deeply cared about the environment, and immediately when we first spoke to him, he had this awareness that maybe other people in his neighborhood didn't. Done his own research. So I think giving him that platform felt really important. And also Professor Shukri, who's the scientist who we followed carrying out this monitoring, we kind of knew that he'd be someone who would want to carry the message of the film after it came out as well. And sort of now he's actually working on more research because he has students who he supervises, and they're doing more pollution monitoring, kind of sort of furthering the work that was done in the film. So yeah, just sort of that choosing who we had as contributors, I think also was really important in kind of thinking about the impact, because you want to choose people who are gonna also believe in the message of the film and want to carry it and create impact and change themselves.
On this, I mean, Miriam, you kind of touched on kind of journalists and what we can achieve when it comes to impact due to what we do. I wondered about collaboration. I mean, in achieving the kind of impact that you've spoken of as well, I think everyone has spoken about in the panel, collaborating with NGOs, organizations, charities, key figures, key opinion leaders, and, what are the challenges that come along with that in achieving impact? And also, what are the positives? What do you have to give and what do you have to take? Isla, I wonder if you wanted to start on this, because I know that's what you guys do at Waterbear. You work with charities in particular.
I mean, I can use an example. We're working with Oxfam right now, creating a campaign for COP coming up in November. I think that there's different ways of facilitating it through an NGO, and we are fortunate enough to be approached to expand on creative storytelling and create positive solutions through that storytelling. And I think that's really important, and it probably goes back to what you said of what can you do wrong, or is there anything that you can't, and I think that we have working with climate activists to work out how we can amplify their voice, but also streamline it with Oxfam's objective, and that's exciting to bring everyone together in order to create impact and a direct action at the end of the campaign. So
yeah. And in you guys' experience collaborating and trying to kind of achieve maximum impact, is there merit to collaborating with NGOs? Are there things that you have to kind of think of or be aware of when it comes to journalists and our kind of constant preoccupation with being impartial and being,
Yeah, well, first thing to say is you can't achieve any impact at all unless you collaborate. Like, collaboration is absolutely essential. Journalism doesn't change anything on its own. Even when you think it has, it hasn't. It's from how, but we do have this important role to play that I spoke of earlier. So, I mean, the bureaus may be a bit of a different example to the documentary world, and we tend not to, I mean, sometimes we do, but we tend not to sort of collaborate with NGOs and so on the actual investigative process on the reporting because of those concerns that people might have. Or, we need to be very clearly following the evidence that we're following rather than following any particular agenda. But that said, we have investigated in collaboration with NGOs and certainly some of our community-driven investigations. You have to, we're not going to suddenly arrive and start investigating with the community. They don't know. It's essential to work with people that that have a relationship of trust with a given community. But we often collaborate with academics, with scientists in a similar way to what Owen has described when in gathering data, gathering evidence. academics, lawyers. We've just done a big investigation into a shocking story about Del Monte, a big pineapple plantation in Kenya, where the security guards are killing and violently, it's like just horrible things to the local population, where there's a bit of a resistance and a fight back, where they're sort of organized pineapple stealing, and the punishment for the pineapple stealing is murder. So we just published that. We worked with public interest lawyers, Lee Day, who went over and are building a big case that they're bringing against Del Monte on behalf of the villagers. So I mean, yeah, there's always challenges. I mean, when you collaborate with any kind of collaboration or partnership, there's going to be positives and there's going to be challenges. I'd say, in terms of timing or in terms of, approach or all the kind of things you can imagine. And I'd say it's really about building trusted relationships. And that comes back to what I said at the beginning, that we try and build relationships over time that aren't specific investigation to investigation kind of relationships. We're trying to embed ourselves in the community of people and organizations that are also working on our issues. And as you build up those trusted relationships over time, you're then able to build really good and, fruitful collaborations, because you already know each other and you already know, what each other is about and so on. But yeah, I think that, the Under Poison Skies example is so powerful and moving and such a great example, about how the work is then going to carry on. Thinking about, we've tried to build a culture of the Bureau of changing the way we think, rather the source journalist relationship. So the people that the reporter is working with and talking to as part of a story, they're not just there to give you the information. They're also the people that are going to sort of take your work and do something with it afterwards. So thinking about that and making sure that part of your thought process isn't just, and your conversations with them isn't just saying, right, give me this quote or that quote, but also, how might this investigation end up being useful to you, and how can we make it more useful ultimately? And then sort of using their input also to shape the distribution plans and the impact plans post-publication. I think that's a bit of a rambling answer, but that's some thoughts around collaboration. I love this point. I mean, that what you described there was just, the perfect kind of impact, the exactly kind of things we'd think about in an impact strategy, but executed so brilliantly. It's such a, I love that the dad spoke to the CEO at the AGM. That's just, it's also obviously so tragic, but it's you have done something there that has a lasting legacy. As you say, the scientists are now continuing based on what, it's really powerful example.
Yeah, I think exactly what you were saying as well, that you put it really well about how, what can journalism do that other organizations or, types of organizations can't do, and I think putting those giving those people a platform to speak truth to power is really important, and that felt like the biggest piece of impact we could have, really. And
even if there's no corporate, even if the corporate accountability doesn't really happen or whatever, the impact that you've had on that family, and that some of the most powerful impact I'm most proud of is when, individuals have said to us, I feel heard, I've been able to tell my story, and the difference that's made to them on a personal level is life-changing, So yeah, I find that more important than anything else that we do.
Absolutely. I think we're going to open the floor up for questions, and I have one more while we're kind of waiting for those to come in, just about how do we balance expectations sometimes. I mean, in these cases that we've spoken and highlighted so far, we've kind of said, you've been able to achieve outstanding impact. Sometimes that doesn't happen in investigations that are super worthy of that kind of same level of impact. And so when you partner, when you work with NGOs, how do you manage expectations? Any experience in that? And also communities. I mean, you want them to be able to tell their stories. You want them to achieve the impact that they had in mind. But do you have to kind of have a conversation at the, and working on something?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think it's important not to kind of overpromise when you're speaking to people about being involved in the documentary, because often people have high expectations that if they participate, things are gonna change. almost immediately, and there'll be instant results. And then often, it's disappointing, and there can be impacts, but maybe they're not the kind of at the level that they're hoping for. I mean, our film has had a lot of impact, but the problem is still very much ongoing. People are still being poisoned by these practices that they haven't stopped, and there's still a lot more work to be done. So I guess, that it's obviously a cliche, but kind of being honest with people, is the best policy, and just telling them, that this is a chance for the story to be heard, and to get the message to the people who maybe have been ignoring you. Because, I mean, in a lot of cases, these communities had been trying to reach out directly to the companies themselves and just being ignored. But obviously, we often get ignored too, and we get, no comment or very little comment from the people who are responsible. So I guess it is important just to be clear that, we can't actually change anything ourselves, and we're just trying to, I guess, put the message out there and get the message to the right people who can change things. So I guess it's good to make that clear.
I would completely echo all of that, just being really honest, and also being very clear that we are not here to try and make a particular change happen. That's not what we're going to try and do, but we are going to get your story out there. But I would just add to it that I think it's also just making sure that through the process by which you're working with these people is really, really positive for them and with them, and and that you're building trust, and so that whatever happens ultimately with the final product, that they are, at the very least, they feel equipped or empowered, or in some way, like that the process of working with you has been good and positive for them, and that is that is impact just as much as the kind of any particular change that might happen. So just being very, very thoughtful and careful about that is also really key.
I think specifically to young journalists or filmmakers, I would try, especially commissioning from a Waterbear perspective, less so for sort of other platforms, but I think focusing in on who do you want to reach, and that's a good way to start the project and the concept and through impact, because like you said, it can come in so many different facets. But if your personal approach for activism within, and where that is going to be reached and how and why, focusing on who you want to reach is really important from the get-go.
Absolutely. Well, let's open the floor up to questions, if that's all right. We've got one.
Hi, thank you so much for sharing your perspectives on this. I've got a question that's a bit more about the logistics of the actual filmmaking process, and perhaps, I suppose, all the way through production, from development to shooting to editing and to the long-living impact as well. But I suppose it's about, when you are crafting these stories, there's something that is subjective about filmmaking. Like, we're trying to perhaps turn objective data into a story, but when we're doing that and we're adding in music, or we're choosing to highlight certain voices and not others, there is a subjective aspect to that. And I suppose in the question about where do you draw the line between perhaps more traditional journalism and a more modern approach, which could verge on the side of activism, what are your perspectives on that? Where can we draw a line, and what questions are you asking yourself if you are involved in that actual filmmaking process of where is going too far and where it feels okay and right?
It's a really good question, and difficult one to answer, I guess. I'm thinking that, well, I guess we don't set out to sort of push a particular message, or we're not sort of raking through people's, because obviously every single character contributor in the film we have hours and hours of footage with, and in the end we are condensing what they're saying down into maybe 10 minutes for each person at best. So I guess we are obviously being quite selective in what we put in there, and that's always going to involve some subjectivity, in we have to make a decision in what goes in. I think, yeah, but at the same time, we're not sort of trying to put words in their mouth or sort of make them seem as though they're saying something that they're not saying. So I think it's really important to sort of try and take the kind of core message of distill it into the 5 minutes that they get on screen, rather than cherry pick certain things which might not be representative of what they think. And I think sometimes it's good to, we can't show people, like the BBC, we have policies about not showing people the footage, unreleased footage, but we can fact check things with people and say, this is broadly what we have you saying in the film. We've used these quotes, and does that reflect what you feel? Are you comfortable with that? And usually it's a yes, because we've spent so much time with the footage that we know that this is really what they feel about the issue. But sometimes they might say, actually, no, I think could you also include the parts where I was talking about this. And obviously we don't have we don't have to. It's sort of that's a sort of untraditional approach to like involve the contributor in what we eventually put in the final edit, but it is something that we sometimes do, especially if it's a vulnerable contributor who's talking about something that could get them into trouble. I think it's something that's important to do. I don't know if that answers your question. I just went off.
I asked quite a rambly question, so I think that's one interesting perspective on it. No, thank you for sharing.
We don't make films at the Bureau, so I guess the question can still apply, right? But I guess there is always more when you're thinking, as you said, about music and particular shots and stuff. Maybe it can be more complicated. At the Bureau, it's generally we make short, very short videos, or we do sometimes do dispatches or panoramas and so on, but we don't make feature docs or anything like that. It's usually print. So I think as you alluded to, objectivity is obviously myth. Like, we all have our subjective views. We're all deciding what stories, the way we're trying to counter that at the Bureau is really trying not just to be thinking inside our little box about what stories are important and what we should do, but really, going out into the world and really trying to get as much outside perspective on that as we can. In fact, the Deliveroo investigation I talked about was where we'd actually asked citizens across the UK through the Daily Mirror, what should we be investigating? And then we ended up going through this whole process of selecting a story to work with the community on. And then we have just incredibly rigorous sort of, fact-checking procedures at the Bureau, sort of among the it's insane. Like, the reporters have to produce, a whole file for their story, and every single thing has to be double sourced, and it cannot be from another media source. And, everything that is a tiny fact has to be, rigorously attributed and sourced, and it's checked by someone that didn't work on the story and isn't even part of the same team, and so on. So we go, I think it is really important when you're explicit about impact. It's sort of even more important to be really explicit about your journalistic standards and your processes and so on. And while I do think it's disingenuous to say we haven't got an agenda, I think we do have an agenda. We have an agenda of truth, and we have an agenda of justice, and we have an agenda of accountability. And I think ultimately we probably do have a bit of agenda of shifting power, as in if there's a lot of power held by people doing bad things, then it's silly to say we're doing this story that's about this really bad thing, but we don't mind if it stops or not. Of course we want this bad thing not to happen, but we're not when we do a story and when we present the story, we start with a question, we follow the facts, and we present the evidence that we find, and we're very, very careful to do that in as broad a way as we possibly can. So I think just being very responsible with how you're doing it is really important. The second that people think you are, that you've got an agenda, then your journalism loses its credibility. So it's really important.
See, can we take any more questions?
Probably for the Bureau, do you find it easy with your publishing partners? Because obviously the press is quite polarized, right and left. And also, what are the best metrics for measuring impact?
Two very excellent questions. It's never easy with partners. We publish with anyone, so we will. I mean, not anyone, but we've published stories with the Mail, we've published stories with the Telegraph, we've published stories with the Guardian. We are really thinking, and that comes down to exactly what you said. It's about audiences. So we will think very strategically about who are the audiences that we are trying to reach in what kind of way, and what are the outlets when it comes to our publishing strategy for an investigation, which are the outlets that are going to both reach the biggest, those target audiences, or that they're most likely to sort of pay attention to. We have all our other kind of distribution and engagement around the publishing partners, but when it comes to the partners, that's what we're thinking about. There's always tons of, it's really hard doing publishing partnerships, there's a ton of negatives, and every now and again we have a question about, should we just publish on our own platform? But in the end, the benefits always outweigh that. We are giving them our investigations for free, but we are sort of getting their audience for free, right? Their wide audience that we would not necessarily otherwise reach. So, we could talk all day about the challenges that we can have with the publishing partnerships. But in terms of who and who we won't work with, we will, we just really think about how to reach the particular audiences in question. And then in terms of measurement, I mean, that has done, everybody has their own version of doing that, and it's really, really hard. How do you quantify social change? It's an intangible kind of thing. But what we really try and do is there are a lot of things that you can count. You can, in terms of how the journalism is used and taken up and picked up. So we'll be tracking how it's reacted to, if an NGO is using it in a report, if an academic is using it in their research, if a politician has raised a question or started a debate, if it's, there's lots of kind of way you can kind of count and track all the different ways that the journalism is being used. And then obviously we also do track those top level things that you can't plan for, like, a policy change is proposed or somebody gets fired or whatever. We're tracking all those big things. And then in terms of some of the qualitative stuff, I mean, this is, honestly, at the Bureau, we're still really early on in our tracking journey, because capturing the information is as big of a challenge as like actually tracking it. So we're starting to do sort of really kind of deep dive qualitative interviews with our big investigations 6 weeks after, with the people that were involved, or the different stakeholders who we aimed to impact. Like, was it, how was the investigation? Do you think it landed? What's the impact that it's been? What was it like working with us? What could we have done better? All of those kind of questions. So yeah, a mix of, and then the traditional reach and engagement. So traffic to the website, or through the partners, we try and get information on traffic and engagement. How is it done on social media? So there's sort of traditional metrics as well. So it's kind of a mix of all of that, qualitative and quantitative stuff.
Can we take another question?
Hi, that's also for the Bureau, and it's an excellent question he asked, which I was going to ask the same thing. But we're a small newsroom, so it sounds like you, BBC and the Bureau, already have a network and an audience. But if you're a really small newsroom and you're doing impactful journalism, but you're not feeling the impact, what tips would you have to both push the impact and measure it as well? If you have any tips for that.
Collaborate. So, I mean, we were only in about, we were sort of 10 people when I joined the Bureau. And as I said, I was production editor then. We didn't have an impact editor, but even at that time, and when we were that small, the Bureau was doing quite a lot of untraditional kind of things, like collaborating with academics, or, submitting evidence to parliamentary inquiries and so on. So I think it doesn't have to be something that requires resource. I mean, obviously, the more resource you have, the more you can do. But it's more the mindset and thinking differently about, how the journalism. Well, first of all, thinking a lot, as we were speaking about, what's the value you're bringing and trying to bring, and how do we produce journalism that is valuable. And then when thinking about how the work is going to go out there, if you don't have a big platform, or you don't have a platform with the kind of particular audiences that you're trying to reach, who can you build relationships with that you can that can reach those audiences, and just building those over time, and even when it does, outside of relationships, stuff like the things I was just talking about, you can always email a politician or an NGO or so on. We've done this story. We think it might be useful to you. Would you like would you be interested in an in-person briefing? That's kind of standard procedure with what we do at the Bureau now. That's just sort of basic stuff that's just is expected that we would, it's just something we do. It's as much as publishing the story. So there's kind of, and somebody sitting in a room with someone and explaining their findings face to face can be way more powerful than them just reading it in a newspaper. So I'd say there's lots of small things you can do that don't necessarily take that much time that can really amplify the power of the story. It's just like thinking strategically, and then but building relationships is really key. Like who is, or how can you meet the target audiences where they are, who already has a relationship of trust, and speaking to them about how you can make your journalism more useful, and how they can share it.
We've got time for a couple more.
Hi, Miriam. Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for a great panel. So I think for some people, solutions journalism is the dirtiest phrase in the world, and for some people it's like the future of journalism. And I'd just love to hear from everyone what you think about that, because I know we're talking about navigating the thin line between activism and journalism. Where does solutions journalism fall in that?
Yeah, sure. I can talk about it. Yeah, I think because I felt like with our film and with quite a lot of the films that we make in BBC Arabic and investigations, we don't focus that much on solutions. If they come up, they're kind of sort of peripheral to the story, I guess. And I do think that there's a really important place for solutions journalism. I think it's just important that the solutions aren't kind of tokenistic, and you have this huge problem, and then I don't know, to take a kind of a slightly extreme example, like we could have this sort of story about oil companies poisoning communities, and then have some people planting trees, and you kind of feel like it's nice that people are planting trees, but it's not the solution, which I think that's probably like an example of a bad solution journalism. But I'm sure you could have a much better version of it, which would be much more powerful. Sometimes it's just the case that people aren't working on the solution to the problem that you're pointing out yet. But I guess I don't know. I'm sort of thinking out loud here, but with something like following someone doing pollution monitoring, although you're not solving the problem, you are kind of moving towards some kind of solution in doing that. So I think it's important, and I also think that it's a big turn-off for audiences not to have some positive element, or some following some sort of thread where there's hope for things to change. So especially when it comes to climate stories, that there's so much doom and gloom, obviously, and for many good reasons, but I think it is also important to empower, and that's definitely an important role for journalism as well. So I do think, solutions journalism has a place, as long as it's realistic and grounded in fact, and not kind of overselling something. I guess that's my just kind of on the spot thought.
So I think solution journalism gets a bad rep just because of misunderstanding a bit about what solution journalism is. Like, I think people think, or journalists have this idea that it's just like good news stories or something, whereas like proper quality, like well done solutions journalism is like proper accountability and reporting and investigative reporting. Really, like it's really based around properly interrogating, you know, a solution that's being tried, and it's very and interrogating the evidence and gathering evidence is one of the key 4 pillars. I can't remember what the other 3 are, but I know that like evidence and like it's not necessarily presenting a solution that works. It could just solutions journalism can be presenting a solution that's being tried and is completely failing and is wasting public money. Like that is a form of solutions journalism as well. So yeah, I think that there is I think there's a really important role to play, because actually the Bureau doesn't do this, and 4 years ago when I wrote my impact vision I said that this is that we should, but there's too many problems. I think investigating a problem, I think if you're investigating the solution or exploring the solution is part of really comprehensively and fully investigating the problem. I think it's not really, we've come to sort of decide it's not properly where the Bureau should invest its resources, but I'd love to like have a sort of, you know, a partnership with another kind of organization where they are sort of doing the solutions journalism that goes along with our more sort of problems journalism. I mean, we do go into some stuff, but it's and like you said about engagement, like it's so much evidence showing that audiences will respond with and engage with solutions journalism much more than just like your traditional kind of doom and gloom investigative reporting. So I think it's really important for impact, because you've got to try and find out like how these problems can be actually worked on and investigate that and interrogate that if you're going to really be a proper part of change.
Okay, time is getting to the end, so I wanted to kind of just end with where can we follow you guys and also your platforms, and also just like a very quick line of advice for people who might be embarking on their first projects and want some advice about impact and starting it early as you guys have.
Well, thank you. It's been incredibly interesting, and all the questions are well thought out as well. So I think I'm excited for the future of solution journalism, actually, and why I joined Waterbear was one of those reasons. I think that there's space for truth and accountability in the industry, and that's where activism plays a role, and it should all be combined, and we should all work together.
And can you just give us the website?
Waterbear.com.
So I'm actually about to leave the Bureau to become, sorry, Hajar works with us right now. So I'm leaving for The Examination, which is a new US non-profit investigative newsroom focused on global public health and corporate accountability for preventable deaths. There's a third of deaths all worldwide are preventable and linked to corporate activity. So I'm going to be the impact editor there instead. I'm very sad to leave the Bureau, and the Bureau is going to be continuing all of its impact work to just the same kind of level. But so in terms of, you can find me at The Examination in a month or two, but you can find me on Twitter. And also I host a kind of informal network for people interested in impact or thinking about impact around the world. We have an online meetup every couple of months. So if you're interested in joining that and listening to those conversations, then please just get in touch and I will add you to the list for that. And just, a word for anybody starting out or thinking about this is, I think, just think about what is the sort of unique value that you want the value that you want your journalism to bring to the world. Who is your journalism for? And just starting to think about that question will inevitably, hopefully, lead you to some good ideas about where to go, who to work with, what kind of stuff to do.
So you can find the documentaries that my team makes on YouTube at BBC Arabic's YouTube channel. That's all in Arabic, but has English subtitles. We also publish, I think, all our documentaries on the BBC World Service YouTube channel in English, and then a lot of them go on iPlayer as well. But You can find me on Twitter and Instagram. I don't use it that much, either that much, but I am on there. Yeah, should use it more. It's good for impact to use social media, but
LinkedIn,
yeah.
you know, that's the new social network now as well, isn't it? So you can,
True. Yeah, I'm on there too. Yeah, I think just for sort of starting out, I would say finding something that I think like the emotional impact is really important, and just something that makes you feel angry, that you really want to change. Yeah. I think that's a great place to start. I know it's where activists also start, but I think it's important that journalists start there too and think, okay, what's my gut reaction to this, and just going with that as something that will then spur impact, because if it's making you angry, it's going to make a lot, or making you sad or upset, then it's going to make a lot of other people feel that way too.
Thank you very much for your time. I'm sure everyone can agree this has been absolutely amazing. So let's give them a round of applause.